When you think of ecology and environment, you have to keep in mind that we need to keep in mind that sustainability and biodiversity are at the basis of our learning. So here today, we're going to look at the key topics about ecology, climate change, environment, sustainability, and biodiversity. This is a review for grade 9D stream science class here in Ontario. But here you'll see you can apply it to most of the curriculum, I'm sure, out there. If it happens you have clarification questions during this live stream, please do tell me, put them in the comments below. Or if you are watching this show in repeat, please put your comments in the comments below, and I will be more than happy to answer them. So let's see if we can work with this. So first of all, when we think of environment, ecology, biodiversity, we have to keep in mind where we are living. So here I have a map about the topography of our world. If you look at the topography here, you realize that some places we have our oceans, which is salt water. We also have areas here in greens, which are very close to the sea level. So here, the northern part of Canada, here, Florida area, here, Louisiana. We have this area here in northern part of South America. And here we also have some areas right here with the northern Asian continent, all the east, the southeastern part here around Africa, also around Austria. Now keep in mind that these areas is where a lot of the population of the planet is. The reason why people are there is it's close to the oceans, the waterways. People can move around easily, and they can have access to the ocean for food, but also land for agriculture. That sounds great so far, but why should we worry about this when we think of ecology? Now, in the last few years, few decades, we've been mentioning that there's an overall increase in temperature of our planet. We call it, we call it climate change. There you go. We call it climate change. There's an increase in overall global temperature on the planet. And what is happening is that those changes of temperature is creating strain on our ecosystems. So I'm going in a broad view of ecosystems at this point. And if you stay along, we're going to probably do a video of 30, 40, maybe 50 minutes on all the key concepts related to the course. So if you look here at this map, you'll realize you can see my cursor, perfect. You can see that the world is an amazing place. However, it's not even everywhere. Now, what would happen if there's a change in climate? So here, if we have an overall increase in global temperature, few things happens. First of all, we have the ice caps that will be melting slowly or don't have a chance every year to stay the size they originally are. So here, if you have the north ice cap, the southern ice cap, if it's ice that is on water, it's nothing to worry about. However, if we have ice on Greenland, for example, right here, or in Antarctica, these are ice glaciers that are on land. Therefore, if they're melting, the water goes into the ocean. So if there's an increased volume of water in the ocean, then what happens is that the ocean level will rise. Now, it's not only the ice melting, because if you're on the planet and you know about water, if you heat water, what happens, there's a thermal expansion of the water. So on top of that, the overall volume of water of the planet is increasing as well. So this is affecting many of the ecosystems on our planet. So let's see why that is. So first of all, if you think of humans and where our cities are, because we're located so close to the ocean line, the shoreline, that means that if the ocean rises, it creates difficulties. Now, if it rises 5 centimeters, nothing to worry about. But if it rises more, 10, 20, 30 centimeters, what happens is that we have all these cities, towns that are located on the shore of the oceans and seas. And what happens here is that our cities are in one place, We're no longer sedentary people, and therefore cannot move our cities as we want. So a rise in sea level is affecting any cities that are along the shoreline. So that's one thing. The second part is that if the water is increasing in temperature, it creates more evaporation. So here there's a few things to keep in mind, and it's about when we think of climate and we think of ecosystems, we can organize different areas on the planet with respect to their biomes. So if I look at this one right here, so let's see if I can make it closer. So if you look here at this map, we can see that in North America, oh, I need to show the map here. Here on the map here, you can show that in North America, we have more desertic areas right here. We have more greenish area here and on the north as well. Now, depending on where you are, there's a variety of biomes, which is a group of ecosystems with similar characteristics. And the key parameters that differentiate these biomes are two of them. One is about temperature, the other one is about precipitation. Okay. So these are two words that are important here. So let's look at the map again. If you are on the eastern side of the United States and Canada, we have a lot of precipitation because we have evaporation from the ocean water in the Atlantic, and we have precipitation right here. So it is great this way. And if you could see, there's a lot of greenery. Agriculture is amazing. We have large forests here for the boreal forest. If you go further north, here it's much colder. So temperatures are lower overall throughout the year, and there's also less precipitation. So therefore, we end up with small plants, and the ecosystems are much different. Cannot support as many organisms or large beasts like, for example, caribous and polar bears. Here, if you look here on the western side of the United States, we have wind coming from the west towards the east. And here there's a lot of precipitation on the edge here. However, by the time we get to this area, we have much drier weather, and that's why it's more desertic. And now here what happens is when you have evaporation here, the evaporation goes up, and the precipitation happens right here on the west coast, but further north than California and in Canada. And here we have the Rockies with amazing ecosystems. Now, if you look in other areas here, we have in this area in the Pacific, when we have evaporation, we have a lot more precipitation right here. That brings us lots of agriculture. Temperature is great because it's close to the equator, and therefore we have a luxurious environment and more people can live here. However, precipitation in this area takes away moistures from the air, and therefore we end up here with a large area here in this area here that are more desertic and then therefore have specific ecosystems. And if you look here in the plateau here in China, the main reason is here as the water goes up here with moistures, it precipitates here on the southern side of the Himalayas, and therefore we have dry air on the northern part. If you go in the middle here in South America and Africa, so along here the equator, we have the tropical forest right here and right here, and even you can even go right here. So tropical forests exist because we have a high temperature, it is warm, high precipitation rate, lots of moistures, and therefore we can have a lot more vegetation. And here you could see in Australia, lots of precipitation can happen on the east coast here, but by the time we get to the middle part, a lot more desertic. So here, this is what creates biomes on our planet. So here, for example, boreal forest right here, they're similar to the boreal forests in the northern part of Europe and Asia. Desertic areas here in north of Africa and the Middle East, very similar in the western part of the US or in Australia, right here. So here we have biomes that are characterized by how much precipitation occurs there and the temperature. So the reason why I'm showing those maps is just to show you that depending on where we are, we have situations where humans are interacting with the environment and therefore it is affecting the ecosystems. So let's see if we can add more as we go along. So first of all, we're talking about ecology, which is the study of ecosystems. We also have sustainability and biodiversity. So the first thing we're going to ask is, what is an ecosystem? So you're going to give me a moment. I'm going to do a quick drawing and then we'll talk about it in a moment. When we think about ecosystems, we have to look at the big picture. So first of all, ecosystems are all the organisms in one area, their interaction with each other, and all of them supported by their environment. So let's see if I can give you some examples here. So here I have small drawings. I have mountains, water's coming through. We have little ponds. We have here a frog, little snakes, a coyote, a rabbit, little insects, trees, birds, and we have a human going for a hike. All of these represent an ecosystem. So how can it be? So let's see. So first of all, we need to have the atmosphere. And in the atmosphere, we have gases. The gases here is carbon dioxide that is used by plants, and we're going to add more information about that in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes from here. We have oxygen, also used by all the animals and humans to be able to live. Now that's the atmosphere. The other part is water. Water is important because all organisms need water to live, including some animals like the frogs needing water to be able to drink and live. We also have the soil. Soil and ground is important to support all the plants, to give nutrients to trees, to make sure things are working nicely. Now, what's interesting, so this is all of what an ecosystem. So we have a place where we have organisms. All the organisms are working together. Their interaction, so how they react with each other, and they're supported by their environment. So that's the definition of an ecosystem. So let's see if we can, let's see, what will be the first topic we're going to look into? Let's look at the four spheres supporting ecosystems. So let's see if I can do that for us. That will be the first one. So the first sphere that we need to consider when we have the environment is what we call the lithosphere. The lithosphere is everything like the rocks, the mountains, the bedrocks, the Earth's crust, the clay, the sand, everything supporting the environment. What's interesting in the lithosphere is that it also includes the soil, and in the soil you have a variety of chemicals. We have nutrients and minerals needed to support life. The next thing that is important is the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere is everything that includes water in our environment. Water can be running water like a creek, a lake, or the ocean. Also, the water vapor in the atmosphere, including the clouds, and then when we have snow. Interestingly enough, we also have ice that could be on mountains because of precipitation. So here, water is in the atmosphere, in the soil, above the ground, and underground. The last one is the atmosphere. The atmosphere is important because we have two gases that we need. Humans, like and coyotes and cats and dogs, we need oxygen to breathe, to make sure that we can survive. We also have carbon dioxide that is important because plants need carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis. And we're going to talk about these processes in the minutes coming. So here are the three key spheres supporting the ecosystems. So if you remember here, we have our ecosystems. In our definition, we have the environment supporting what? The organisms. So if you look at the drawing I have right here, where would the organisms go? So here I have a fourth sphere that I put above. Perfect. So here the biosphere is amazing because the biosphere is all the living organisms interacting with each other. But in order to do so, it needs the ground and the lithosphere, because without the ground, there's no minerals and vitamins for the plants, which is used by all other organisms when they eat. We don't have the, let's say, the support for trees to be able to make sure that things are working nicely. Now, the biosphere also needs water. Water is important because it brings nutrients, but also brings water that allows for plants to be able to grow. And the plants are at the base of all the, the, the food that all organisms are using on the planet. And on top of that, in order to live, the biosphere needs an atmosphere, which brings water, but also has oxygen because we breathe and brings the carbon dioxide. So this is a great example on how we can put the four spheres together to summarize what an ecosystem is. So ecosystem being all the organisms, their interaction supported by their environment. So that means that if you go to the map that I have right here, and you look in Canada, for example, so here, the resources that we have, the water that we have is different than what we have in the southern part here. The nutrients in the soil, the quantity of water, and what we have in the atmosphere differs from here to the northern part of Europe, Asia, or if you look here, even within China, on the west side compared to the east side. So here, ecosystems change because of how much water and temperature there are, but also the supporting environment that they have. So this is like a good introduction to say what all of these things are. Okay, so let's see this one. Let's look at other definition. The other definition we're going to talk about will be about, let's see, biotic and abiotic components. So let's see. So there you go. So the next portion is about biotic and abiotic factors. When you think of biotic, we have the first three letters, bio, which refers to living things. So when you have an environment and you think about the biotic factor, and you look at this sketch right here, the biotic factor is everything that includes plants, grass, but also all the insects, animals, organisms, underground, above ground, living in water, and living in the air, including humans. We're all living organisms. Another word that is useful is abiotic. An abiotic factor is one of those components, or one factor that is part of the environment supporting the organism. So if you look here in this drawing, the abiotic factors will be in the atmosphere, the different gases needed, would also be water, which is important here to support the environment, and everything in the soil. So if we go back to the graph right here, the biotic factors are anything in the green circle here, and the abiotic factor is all the other three spheres, which are the lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere right here. Perfect. So let's see if we can continue a little bit on the next topic. We've talked about this spheres, food chain. Okay, let's look at food chain and food. Let's see, food web. So let's go with my drawing right here. So here I have an ecosystem with a variety of organisms. If you had a food chain like this, a food chain is one way where energy is transferred. So for here, you could take, for example, the grass. The grass is eaten by the bug or by an insect, the insect is eaten by the frog, and the frog is eaten by a bird. That would be a food chain. It is one line of going from the plant all the way to the bird. This is one way where the energy is going. Another difference between a food chain and a food web, like this. So here we have the plants. The plants are eaten by the insect and by the rabbit here. So that's something to consider. Now, what's interesting, the bugs here are eaten by the birds, by the frogs, and also, let's see, some of them are probably eaten by some grass snakes, for example. And the grass snakes are eaten by coyotes. We have the frogs eaten. I love coyotes like frogs. If they're hungry, they would, but they would certainly eat the rabbit. And what would happen? We have here the bird that do eat insects, but if you have large birds, birds of prey, they would eat rabbit, they would eat frogs, and they would certainly eat snakes. So here, if you have a food web, it's all these interactions that are going on right here. And keeping in mind that many of these organisms would use the plants to be able to have a home and get food. You also have some of animals will go underground to get shelter, but also get food. So that's a big difference between a food chain and a food web. So hopefully it does make sense as we go along. Okay, so the next topic we're going to look into would be the different cycles that are supporting life in ecosystems. So here we're going to define a bit more how the environment is going. So let's look at the three cycles first. Let's look at a few cycles that are going on in our environment. The first one we're going to have is what we call the water cycle. The water cycle here is driven by our heat source, which is the sun. And through the sun, we have what we call evaporation of water. So here, if you have, for example, a lake, the sun will heat up the water and there's evaporation. So the water molecule will go into the sky. Now, when it gets into the atmosphere, it will form clouds because we have water molecules that will create droplets. And eventually, this, through condensation, will form either water droplets or water crystals called snow, and it will either go here on the ground or it can even go on the top here of mountains. So we have precipitation. Once the water is on the ground here and melted at some point with the sun, we have the water that is running off on the surface of the ground, going back to creeks and lake. If it happens that we have a good porosity of the ground, then what happened here is that we have the water that will going through underground and will go down the mountains, different areas, back to the lakes and the ocean. So this is what we call the water cycle. Now the next one is what we call the nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen cycle here is interesting. It happens underground because keep in mind that nitrogen, even though it's quite abundant in our atmosphere, between 78, like about 78 degrees, plus or minus a few percent, we have a lot of nitrogen. However, when we breathe in and breathe out, this oxygen is not used or cannot be used with our body due to the chemical composition and the strength of the bonds in the nitrogen gas. So what happens, we need to absorb nitrogen because we even have nitrogen in our DNA. We need to find a way to ingest it, and we ingest it through our food. So how does nitrogen end up in our food? Let's see. So first of all, we have different processes. The first one is called nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation, we have bacteria because everything, all these processes happens with bacteria. Bacteria. So through their metabolism, They're using the nitrogen and the water in the ground, and they will form new compounds with nitrogen and hydrogen, and it will be called ammoniac and ammonia. These are two new compounds that plants can use to grow faster. It's part of the fertilizer group of chemicals. Now there's other sets of bacteria, there you go, that would do what we call the nitrification. Nitrification are bacteria that will take ammoniac and ammonium through their metabolism will create nitrites and nitrates. And these are important because nitrites and nitrates are water soluble. And because these are a group of atoms that have a charge, these will be able to associate with, for example, potassium, calcium, magnesium. We also have iron and a few other nutrients, minerals that together will form compound that can dissolve in water, that can be used by trees and by plants to grow. And that's beautiful because through nitrogen that was in the gas form right here, and nitrogen fixation and nitrification, we now have a way for nitrogen to go into plants. And that's beautiful because we do like to eat. We do like to eat plants, but also organisms that eat plants. And that's how we get our nitrogen. Now, the third part is called denitrification. So through time and space, there may be times where there's more or less precipitation, there's more or less heat, you may have lightning, you may have some compounds that are unstable for different reasons. And what happened is that some of these ammoniac, ammonium, and nitrite and nitrates will go back into the atmosphere as either nitrogen compound like this, or it could also be in other molecules and it goes in the atmosphere. So hence creating a cycle that is important. So that's our second cycle. The third cycle is what we call the carbon cycle. So the carbon cycle at the basis, we can call photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So if I'm going to start with this because this is what the bases are. This is where our environment is the most equilibrium time. So if you have plants, and we have plants in the environment, lots of them, trees, small plants, brushes and such, they take here carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the water through the roots, and in their organelle, in their the plant cell, there you go, we have the chloroplast that will do the photosynthesis with the sun, which is great because we have the sun every day. Now, they will create two substances. One is glucose or other type of molecules to create the structure of plants like this, and one waste gas, which is oxygen. Now, the beauty with this is that us, humans, and organisms like small animals need oxygen when we breathe. And therefore, these, which are what we call reactants, are used by the plants, creating two things that we need: energy for us to live and oxygen. This is called photosynthesis. Now, the reverse reaction is called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration happens when we have organisms taking sugar, for example, eating, doing activities, and needing oxygen. We inhale oxygen, we do the process, we have energy, and we have two waste products. First one is carbon dioxide, and the second one is water, which is great because these can be used by plants in photosynthesis. So when this is in equilibrium, that is fantastic. However, there are times when this is no longer in equilibrium. So let's see what happens. So first of all, the key ones that you may have heard of is this idea of carbon dioxide. This one right here. And you're going to say, why do people worry about carbon dioxide? So let's see if I can give a few ideas. So first of all, first thing to keep in mind is in the environment, it does happen that environments produce carbon dioxide. So for example, there might be a fire. There could be volcanoes. And what happens, we have carbon dioxide that is increasing in the environment. That is naturally occurring. Photosynthesis will happen to keep these from working together. Now, what's interesting though, is that we have humans, and when humans are coming in, we need houses. So when we need houses, what do we do sometimes? We cut the trees so we can have materials to build a house. So by cutting the trees, using plant-based materials to be able to construct something for even for clothing and otherwise, we are affecting, let's put a different colors, we're affecting photosynthesis. So here we are affecting the photosynthesis. So what happens here? There might be an increased carbon dioxide because we are using machines to do so, but there's also a decrease in how much oxygen is being produced. Now, on top of that, what's interesting with humans, we do love to have stuff. So when we have stuff, here's this is a manufacture. We want to have books. We want to have different things that are in our houses to make sure we have the lifestyle we want. We need to build them. And on top of that, many people, they like to use transportation to be able to move around as a human. But on top of that, when we create goods, if it's done close by, we need to carry them. But if they're made in other countries, we need ships. We also need trains to transport all of these. And therefore, we have an increase in carbon dioxide like this. So we do this. But on top of that, because we need space for it, we are taking ground where there used to be vegetation to do what we need. So here, humans tend to do all kind of activities where there's carbon dioxide that is increasing all the time. But where do we take the energy here? We take the energy from often a source that is taken underground. It could be coal, it could be crude oil, it could be gas. So what happens in the last several tens of millions of years, there was plants doing photosynthesis, gathering, keeping, and storing carbon dioxide in their structure. With time and sedimentation, there was here. So these were like areas where carbon dioxide was stored here and no longer in the atmosphere. Now, using coal for our manufacturers, crude oil for our cars, gas to heat up our houses or make things work. What happens is that here we used to have carbon dioxide that was taken out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Now they're put in the atmosphere again, and then we have an increased quantity of carbon dioxide. So this, when you think of the carbon cycle, this is all of this together. And on top of that, humans, there's more and more humans on the planet, and therefore we need more and more energy from here. And where do we get it? Well, that's a good question. We need plants so we can have food. So the whole thing here over the last 150 years is not as balanced as it used to be. So that's why scientists are talking about the fact that we need to be mindful of the resources we need, our environment, to make sure that we are mindful of the ecosystem and ecology so that we can be sustainable with what we do and we can maintain biodiversity. All of these work together to make sure that ecosystems are working nicely. So let's see if there's other topics we're going to talk about today. This predation. I think that is pretty good. I'm going to do one more thing about predation before we go. So the last topic we're going to cover today will be the predator-prey cycle. So how does that work? Well, if you are in an area, so here we have the number of organisms. We are in an area where everything works well, and we have C and blue. Oops. I don't have a good blue. Let's see if it, oh, that's better. We have an environment where we have, for example, rabbits that can live in peace. So what happened? We have an increase in the population of rabbits. Where I live, there's also a big population of coyotes in the town. So what happens is that if you have a few coyotes, that's okay, but they need to eat. But if the coyotes can't come, they notice there's rabbit, they'll be able to increase their population because there's enough food. The consequence, though, of more coyotes in the area will be that they will eat more rabbit. So what will happen? The population of rabbit will decrease like this. So as the coyotes are increasing in number, at some point there's less rabbit. So what will happen? The number of coyotes will decrease like this because there's not enough food. So what will happen to the coyotes? Either the coyotes might they might die because they don't have enough food, or they might decide to move somewhere else when there is more food. Now, in the area, if there's less coyotes, what will happen? The rabbit will say there's less predators. So what will happen is that it will go up again. It will go up again because there's less of a predator right here. But because here we have more rabbit in the area, consequence, we're going to have the number of coyotes come increasing as well. So we have here a cycle of predator-prey where there's a fluctuation in the number of coyotes here because of how much, because of the availability of the food for them. So this is what we call, it's not exactly always the same. So if you think like this and like this and like this, you could see they're shifted a little bit because here we have an increase in coyotes up until there's a decrease in the number of prey. And as these are going down, coyotes are going down a bit further, and then we have the number of rabbit increasing. So it's not quite on top of each other. There's a little shift between the two graphs, and that shows how it is. And that will be the last key topic that I wanted to include. There might be other topics that I covered over the month that we did the ecosystems unit, but that covers more or less the key topics about ecosystems. What is an ecosystem? What is an environment? What are the different aspects or parts of the environment using the four spheres? We also talked about sustainability and biodiversity to make sure that if we are mindful of sustainability and biodiversity, it's the best way to keep our planet healthy, to make sure that everybody can have food and can live healthy. On this, if you have any questions or clarification questions, you can put them in the comments below. And that is the review for our exam that will happen in January about ecosystems. In the meantime, if you want to learn about other science topic, I'm going to put here another video where we can continue learning, and I'll see you there.